There are women whose beauty glows softly, like a candle in the dark. And then there was Maureen O'Hara, ablaze, a living flame of Technicolor. From the moment she stepped onto a Hollywood set, she didn't merely appear on screen, she struck it. Copper-red hair that shimmered like burning embers, eyes as sharp as an Irish winter sea, skin pale as porcelain, and a posture that belonged on a battlefield rather than a casting couch. She wasn't the kind of woman Hollywood was used to. She wasn't decorative. She wasn't pliable. She wasn't afraid. And Hollywood didn't know what to do with a woman it couldn't tame. They adored her fire, worshipped the way Technicolor wrapped itself around her features, and yet flinched at the force of her will. Maureen refused to be sexualized, refused to be molded, refused to smile when she didn't want to. She defended herself with the same instinctive ferocity her Celtic ancestors once carried into war. She would hit back, literally, when a man crossed a line. She would walk away from a studio contract rather than betray her dignity. Behind the fierce beauty lay something rarer, a moral spine that never bent, even when the industry pushed, punished, and eventually erased her from the awards she deserved. But fire burns from more than glory. It burns for love, for truth, for the things a woman holds close to her heart. And Maureen's heart, so bold on screen, carried wounds deeper than fame could hide. Betrayals, broken marriages, a love that felt like destiny, and a loss that shattered her world. This is not the story of an actress. This is the story of a woman who walked through Hollywood like a storm, brilliant, defiant, and unforgettable. Long before the arc lights of Hollywood tried to claim her, before Technicolor crowned her its queen, Maureen Fitzsimons was simply a fierce little girl running through the gray streets of Dublin, a girl whose spirit always felt too bright for the world around her. She grew up in a household where discipline was iron, pride was sacred, and emotions were not politely packaged. Her father was a former rugby player, her mother a contralto singer with a presence that filled a room. Maureen inherited both, the strength of one, the artistry of the other. By the time she was 10, she could sing with the power of a trained performer and act with the conviction of someone twice her age. People didn't just notice her talent, they felt it. Yet even then, her fire came with consequences. Teachers described her as too intense. Classmates whispered that she was too serious. And casting directors in Dublin's small theater scene admired her ability but struggled with her temperament. She questioned everything: direction, motivation, staging, not out of arrogance, but because she understood instinctively what truth in performance should feel like. It made adults uncomfortable. It made Maureen unstoppable. At 14, she was accepted into the Abbey Theatre, the cradle of Irish drama. There, she learned craft, breath control, physicality, and the kind of emotional discipline most actresses only grasp in adulthood. But she also learned something else, that the world would always try to soften a woman like her. She fought back, even then. When male counterparts spoke down to her, she pushed right back. When a director dismissed her ideas, she challenged him. She wasn't rude, she was precise. And she refused to apologize for it. Her life changed the day a visiting American producer saw her perform. He didn't just see talent, he saw a presence, a force, something that could slice through celluloid. He arranged a screen test. The camera loved her instantly, but it didn't adore her gently. It submitted. Within months, Hollywood came calling. But Maureen knew nothing of the machinery she was walking into. Nothing of the contracts, the unspoken rules, the expectations of compliance. She arrived in America in 1939 with a suitcase, a devastating combination of innocence and strength, and the same burning eyes studio executives would soon fear. Her first major test came with the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Cast as Esmeralda, she proved what the Dublin stages had known for years. She wasn't playing emotions, she was living them. Critics praised her intensity. Audiences were transfixed. Hollywood realized it had found something rare, a woman who looked like a dream but acted like a fighter. And that was the beginning of the clash. Maureen's talent was undeniable, but her refusal to be molded made her an anomaly. She wouldn't flirt with executives, wouldn't pose suggestively, wouldn't tolerate wandering hands, and refused to be branded as a pinup. She carried herself like a warrior, not a starlet. In an industry built on control, that made her dangerous. Still, she rose. Each film made her flame brighter. Each role sharpened her presence. And with every success, Hollywood's fascination grew, along with its fear that this Irish girl was far too powerful, far too independent, far too impossible to bend. Maureen O'Hara's fire had arrived, and Hollywood was about to learn that some flames cannot be shaped, only survived. When Maureen O'Hara stood before a Technicolor camera, something almost alchemical happened. Hollywood had spent years experimenting with color film, searching for faces that could withstand its intensity. But Technicolor didn't simply flatter Maureen, it surrendered to her. Her copper-red hair burned like a live ember. Her porcelain skin glowed with a purity the medium had never captured before. And her sharp blue eyes seemed carved out of some ancient Irish sea. The camera didn't just admire her, it gravitated to her as if compelled, and the industry quickly realized it had found a face that could define an era. Soon, the nickname followed, the Queen of Technicolor, not as marketing, but as acknowledgement of a visual truth no one could deny. Yet Maureen understood from the beginning that beauty, especially a beauty as fierce and unmistakable as hers, was both a blessing and a battlefield. Hollywood wanted to celebrate her radiance, but it also wanted to contain it, to soften the edges of a woman who was born sharp. That attempt at containment collided head-on with the two men who would shape the most iconic chapters of her career, John Ford and John Wayne. Ford, with his volcanic brilliance, was drawn to Maureen in a way that blurred the lines between admiration and possession. He saw in her a purity of presence, a rawness of emotion, and a kind of moral authority that few actors possessed. That attraction, unspoken but unmistakable, fueled his most inspired work and his most destructive impulses. Ford pushed her relentlessly, sometimes cruelly, compelled not only by artistic vision, but by the tempest inside him. Maureen, unafraid and unbreakable, pushed right back. Their sets often felt like emotional battlegrounds, but from that clash came performances that would become cinematic history. In contrast, John Wayne represented a different gravitational pull in her life. Where Ford erupted, Wayne steadied. He respected Maureen in a way that was rare for male stars of the time. He treated her as his equal, not his accessory. Their chemistry didn't rely on flirtation or artifice. It was the meeting of two strong, unapologetic energies. Neither willing to yield, both instinctively aware that they were better together than apart. On screen, they created a dynamic that felt elemental, almost mythic. The immovable force and the unstoppable flame. Audiences didn't simply watch them. They were swept into the emotional weight of every stare, every argument, every moment where pride and longing collided. Nowhere was this fusion more perfect than in The Quiet Man, the masterpiece that crystallized Maureen's cinematic identity. As Mary-Kate Danaher, she delivered a performance that transcended storytelling and touched something ancestral. Her Mary-Kate was proud, wounded, passionate, and profoundly human. a woman whose strength echoed the spirit of Ireland itself. Ford's direction, Wayne's grounding presence, and Maureen's incandescent power created a film that felt less like fiction and more like folklore captured on celluloid. It became the crown jewel of her career, the role that would define her for generations. But even as audiences adored her, Hollywood grew increasingly uneasy. Maureen's independence offended the industry's unwritten rules. She refused to be sexualized, refused to be infantilized, refused to compromise her dignity for publicity. She carried herself with a warrior's posture, and that terrified executives who preferred their actresses compliant and grateful. Technicolor had turned her into a goddess, but her personality made her a threat, and threats were something the studio system didn't tolerate well. Still, in this period, Maureen was unstoppable. Each film deepened her legend, and each performance affirmed what Hollywood both loved and feared. A woman whose beauty could light up the screen, and whose fire could burn through any attempt to tame her. She wasn't simply thriving, she was redefining what a leading woman in the golden age could be. As Maureen O'Hara's fame grew, so did Hollywood's uneasy fascination with her. The studio system of the 1940s and 1950s was built on obedience, contracts that dictated every hour of an actor's life, publicists who crafted artificial personalities, and executives who expected actresses to bow, smile, and comply. Maureen, however, walked into that world with the quiet certainty of someone who had never learned how to fear authority. She didn't use her beauty as currency, didn't flirt to gain favor, and didn't pretend to be anyone she wasn't. She arrived at meetings without the sugary politeness expected of women. She listened, questioned, negotiated, and refused. And refusal, in Hollywood, was an unforgivable sin. Producers admired her screen presence, but found her temperament troublesome. Directors praised her discipline, but complained she was too outspoken. Studio heads were dazzled by her face, yet unsettled by her mind. Maureen rejected photo shoots that she felt objectified her, demanded physical boundaries on set, and confronted anyone who crossed them, even if that confrontation involved a slap, a punch, or a swift end to a handshake that lingered too long. She refused to be posed as a pinup, refused to wear costumes designed for titillation, and refused to let her image be turned into something that betrayed the woman she was. In an era when silence was survival, Maureen insisted on dignity. That insistence came at a price. While actresses around her floated toward award circuits and studio-backed campaigns, Maureen remained curiously absent from Oscar conversations. She delivered acclaimed performances, resonant, powerful, culturally significant, but Hollywood withheld its highest honors. Insiders whispered the truth everyone understood, but no one said aloud. She was too strong, too principled, too unwilling to play the political games that determined who rose and who faded. Behind the velvet curtains of the Golden Age, being difficult meant being punished, and Maureen became one of its most visible casualties. Her career was vibrant, her talent undeniable, but the industry refused to let her ascend to the pedestal she deserved. Then came the moment that exposed the full brutality of that system. In 1957, the tabloid Confidential, notorious for inventing scandals and destroying reputations, published a sensational story claiming Maureen had been caught in a compromising act with a man in the back of a darkened movie theater. It was a lie so outrageous it bordered on absurdity, especially since Maureen was in Spain on the exact date the magazine alleged the incident occurred. But the truth didn't matter. Within days, the story spread across America. Studio executives panicked, newspapers hinted, gossip columns smirked. The industry that had never quite embraced her independence now watched eagerly, wondering if this scandal might finally break the woman they could not control. But Maureen O'Hara wasn't built to break. Instead of hiding, apologizing, or waiting for the storm to pass, she marched straight into battle. She sued Confidential for libel, becoming one of the few stars of her era brave enough to challenge the tabloid empire. The legal fight was vicious and public, but Maureen refused to waver. She testified with clarity, confidence, and a moral fierceness that stunned the courtroom. And then, in an outcome almost unheard of at the time, she won. The verdict didn't just clear her name, it humiliated the tabloid, became a landmark moment for celebrity rights, and transformed Maureen into a symbol of resistance in an industry that rarely allowed women to defend themselves. Yet victory came with a shadow. Hollywood had watched her defy them, defy the press, defy the unwritten rules of female behavior. They admired her strength, but they feared it more. And although the scandal did not destroy her career, it confirmed a truth that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Maureen O'Hara was a woman the system could not bend, and therefore a woman it would never fully reward. For all her fire, for all the strength she carried into every room, Maureen O'Hara's heart remained the most unguarded part of her. She could stand up to Hollywood executives, confront predatory men, battle an entire tabloid empire and win. Yet, when it came to love, she longed for something simple, something honest, something that would not demand she shrink herself to fit inside it. But the path to that love was carved with disappointment. Her first marriage collapsed under the weight of incompatibility and betrayal. Her second added wounds instead of healing. And both left Maureen with a lingering ache she rarely spoke of. People assumed a woman as strong as she was didn't break easily. They were wrong. Everything changed when she met Charles Blair, a decorated aviator with a presence as steady as the sky he flew. Blair was not intimidated by her strength or her fame. He admired it. He treated her not as an ornament, nor as a conquest, but as a partner, a rarity in her world. With him, Maureen found the peace she had never known in Hollywood. Their life together on the island of St. Croix was a world away from the studio lots and political games of the film industry. For the first time, she wasn't performing, she was simply living. Friends would later say she glowed differently around Blair. Still fierce, still radiant, but softer in the quiet moments, as if finally allowed to rest. It was the great love she had spent half a lifetime waiting for. And then came the day that split her world in two. In 1978, Charles Blair died in a plane crash while piloting a commercial flight. The official explanation labeled it an accident, a tragic chain of mechanical failures and misfortune. But Maureen, with her instinctive clarity and refusal to accept easy answers, felt a strange chill of doubt from the beginning. Reports conflicted, timelines didn't match, certain details were brushed aside. There were whispers, subtle, quiet, almost fearful, that something about the crash didn't add up. And as grief consumed her, another battle began, one far darker than any she had faced from Hollywood tabloids or studio executives. Blair's relatives turned on her with startling speed. They challenged her inheritance, questioned her motives, and hinted publicly at suspicions that cut straight into the heart of her loss. Maureen, still drowning in sorrow, suddenly found herself dragged into legal disputes, interrogations, and a storm of accusations fueled not by truth, but by bitterness and greed. The isolation was devastating. She had always been a fighter, but now she was fighting alone, with her greatest source of strength ripped away from her and her deepest wound exposed for the world to prod. The legal battle stretched on for years, each one reopening the grief she was trying to survive. There were days when people feared the flame inside her had finally dimmed. But even in that darkness, she held on to the core of who she was. She stood firm, presented evidence, countered every lie, and refused to let the memory of the man she loved be twisted into something ugly. Slowly, painfully, she reclaimed her life. What she could not reclaim, what no one could return, was Blair himself. In the wake of his death, Maureen lived with a quiet, enduring sorrow. She would later admit that she never truly recovered, that the love she lost was the only one that ever made her feel fully seen. She never remarried. She never searched for a replacement. She carried Blair with her, not as a ghost, but as a truth, perhaps the only part of her story she wished had been written differently. After Charles Blair's death and the long, bruising legal storm that followed, Maureen O'Hara retreated from the noise of Hollywood and the cruelty of public life. She had spent decades living under the scrutiny of cameras, surviving studios that wanted to control her, journalists who tried to shame her, and an industry that punished her for refusing to bow. Now she chose something radically simple: silence, privacy, and the small, luminous comforts of ordinary days. She settled in St. Croix, the island she had once shared with Blair, and poured herself into family, community work, and the calm rhythm of nature. She gardened, she cooked, she wrote. She breathed in a way she hadn't been allowed to in Hollywood, where every movement was watched and every emotion weighed. And yet, even in peace, the past left shadows she couldn't fully escape. For a while, life seemed to reward her resilience. She became a beloved figure on the island, respected not for fame but for kindness. Residents spoke of her as a woman both majestic and approachable. The legendary Maureen O'Hara, who could command a film set with a single glare, now laughing with children in a marketplace or helping neighbors during hurricane seasons. It was as if her fire, once used to survive the machinery of Hollywood, had softened into a steady warmth that lit the lives around her. But fate, which had never allowed Maureen an easy path, returned with one final test. In her later years, as her health declined and she moved closer to family, a bombshell accusation shook the public once more. Her daughter alleged that Maureen was being financially abused by those around her. The implication, dark, sensational, and deeply painful, spread through the media with the same speed that had once carried the lies of Confidential. For a woman who had built her entire life on integrity, the accusation cut deeper than scandal. It questioned her autonomy, her clarity, her very dignity in the twilight of her life. The investigation that followed was invasive and exhausting. Officials interviewed caretakers, reviewed documents, inspected accounts, questioned witnesses, and dissected every aspect of her private world. The woman who had survived Hollywood's cruelty now endured a different kind of scrutiny: cold, bureaucratic, clinical. And yet, even as age threatened her voice, even as frailty replaced physical strength, Maureen remained unmistakably Maureen. Her statements were sharp, her recollections precise, her spirit unbroken. She cooperated fully, not out of fear, but out of fury that anyone might believe she had ever lost control of her own life. And once again, as she had done so many times before, she won. The inquiry concluded with a clear verdict. There was no wrongdoing, no hidden plot, no shadowy manipulation. What remained was the truth she had always carried with her. She was strong. She was lucid. She was in charge. Even age could not extinguish the flame that had carried her through every chapter of her life. A year later, Hollywood, perhaps softened by time, perhaps ashamed of how it had treated her, reached out with the apology it should have given decades earlier. In 2014, at age 94, Maureen O'Hara received an honorary Oscar, a golden symbol of recognition for a woman who had never played by anyone's rules. As she stood on stage, wrapped in emerald green, her voice steady despite age, the audience rose to its feet. They weren't applauding a star, they were applauding a survivor. In 2015, She passed away quietly in her sleep, far from the noise that had once defined her world. And yet the legacy she left behind burned brightly, proof that a woman can walk through fire again and again and never lose herself. In the end, Maureen O'Hara's story is not the tale of a Hollywood darling, nor the rise and fall tragedy the industry so often writes for its brightest women. It is something far rarer, the life of a woman who remained entirely, unequivocally herself from the first frame to the last. She walked through an era designed to sculpt actresses into fantasies, yet she refused to be sculpted. She faced men who wanted to command her, systems built to contain her, scandals engineered to humiliate her, and losses heavy enough to silence gentler souls. But Maureen did not dim. She burned. Time has a way of softening legacies, of sanding sharp edges, of rewriting strength as myth. But even now, decades after her heyday, Maureen's presence still feels startlingly modern. Her defiance, her independence, her insistence on dignity. These were not traits celebrated in the mid-century world she lived in. They were the traits of a woman born ahead of her time, a woman who refused to negotiate her worth, a woman whose integrity cut through Hollywood's artificial glitter with clean, unflinching truth. And yet, beneath all that fire, there was always a human softness, private, guarded, rarely seen on screen. The young Dublin girl who wanted to act with honesty. The woman who looked for a love that would not try to eclipse her. The widow who carried grief with the quiet strength of someone who had already survived too much. That duality, fierce and fragile, is what makes her unforgettable. If you close your eyes, you can almost see her again, standing in a wash of Technicolor light, hair glowing like a flame against the dark, eyes steady, posture unbroken. Not a symbol, not an icon, a woman. And the fire she carried, untamed, unyielding, still burns in every memory she left behind.